The scream of a woman being denied her most basic needs echoed through the dusty streets of Goldfield, Nevada, and Harrison Nash would remember that sound for the rest of his days. He had descended from the Ruby Mountains 3 days prior, his pack-horse laden with pelts and his beard grown thick from months spent trapping in the high country. The year was 1881, and Goldfield was experiencing a minor silver boom that had brought all manner of folk to this harsh desert town. Harrison stood 6'4" in his worn boots, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, and his arms corded with muscle from years of survival in the unforgiving wilderness. His dark hair fell past his collar, and his hands were rough and calloused from honest work. He had been standing outside the general store about to enter when he heard the commotion inside. Through the window, he could see a young woman clutching a small cloth purse, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "I said get out." The shopkeeper, a portly man named Silas Morton, pointed toward the door. "I do not serve your kind here." Harrison pushed through the door, the bell jangling overhead. The woman turned, and he saw her properly for the first time. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with rich brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, and eyes that blazed with defiance despite the tears threatening to spill. Her dress was clean but threadbare, patched in places, and her boots were so worn the leather had cracked. Her skin held the sun-kissed tone that spoke of mixed heritage, and Harrison understood immediately why Morton was refusing her service. "There is nothing wrong with my money," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "These coins are as good as anyone else's. I do not care about your money, girl. I have got a reputation to maintain. What would my customers think if I started serving Indians and half-breeds? Now get out before I have the sheriff remove you." Harrison felt his jaw tighten. He had spent years in the mountains, where a person's worth was measured by their character and their ability to survive, not the color of their skin or who their parents were. This kind of hatred had always disgusted him. The woman's shoulders straightened and she lifted her chin with fierce pride. "My money is honest, I work for it. I clean houses for the women in this town, and I ask for nothing but fair treatment." "Well, you will not get it here. Out." Harrison stepped forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Every eye in the store turned to him. He was aware of how he must look, wild and dangerous, more bear than man after his time in the mountains. "Good. Let them be nervous." "The lady was here first," Harrison said, his voice a low rumble. "Seems to me she should get her shopping done before you attend to anyone else." Morton's face reddened. "This is my store, and I will decide who I serve. This is none of your concern, stranger. I am making it my concern." Harrison moved closer to the counter, and Morton took an involuntary step back. "Now, what does the lady need?" The woman looked at Harrison with surprise and suspicion mixed together. "I do not need your charity." "Not offering charity." "Offering common decency, which seems to be in short supply around here." He turned back to Morton. What was she trying to purchase? Morton's mouth worked silently for a moment before he managed to speak. "She wanted flour, coffee, and some preserves." "But I already told her." "I heard what you told her. And I am telling you that you are going to sell me those items right now, and then I am going to give them to whoever I damn well please. Unless you want to refuse my business too." The shopkeeper looked at Harrison's massive frame, at the knife on his belt and the rifle he carried, and whatever fight was in him died quickly. "That will be different. You are a paying customer." So was she. Harrison pulled out his leather coin purse. "Get the items. And make it the good flour, not the weevil-infested trash you probably sell to folks you think cannot complain." While Morton scurried around gathering the requested items, Harrison turned to the woman. Up close, He could see the proud set of her jaw, the intelligence in her dark eyes, and the way her hands trembled slightly even as she tried to maintain her composure. "I meant what I said," she told him quietly. "I do not need charity." "And I meant what I said too. This is not charity. This is just doing what is right." He paused. "Name's Harrison Nash. Most folks just call me Nash." She studied him for a long moment as if trying to determine whether he could be trusted. Finally, she said, "Faye Garrett." "Miss Garrett." He touched the brim of his hat. "It is just Faye. And I will pay you back for whatever you spend here. Every cent." "We can discuss that later. Where do you live? I will walk you home with your supplies." Her eyes widened. "That is not necessary. I have been walking these streets alone for 3 years now. I can manage." "I am sure you can. But those supplies will be heavy, and I have got nothing but time." He lowered his voice. "And I would wager that Morton there might send someone to harass you the moment you leave if you are alone. Me being with you might prevent that." Faye's expression flickered with something that might have been gratitude, though she still looked reluctant to accept help. Before she could respond, Morton returned with the items, practically throwing them onto the counter. "That will be $2.30, he said, his tone surly. Harrison counted out the money carefully, making sure Morton saw each coin. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, refusing an honest customer because of ignorant prejudice." "My store, my rules," Morton muttered, but he would not meet Harrison's eyes. Harrison gathered the supplies into his arms. The flour sack alone weighed 25 pounds, and there was also a pound of coffee and 2 jars of preserves. For a woman of Faye's slight build, carrying all this would have been difficult indeed. They walked out into the bright Nevada sun, and Harrison blinked against the harsh light. The street was busy with miners, merchants, and the usual assortment of characters that populated a boom town. Several people watched them with undisguised curiosity as they passed. Faye walked with her head high, ignoring the stares and whispers. Harrison matched his stride to hers, his presence seeming to create a bubble of space around them that others instinctively avoided. "I live at the edge of town," Faye said after they had walked in silence for a few minutes. "In a small cabin near the dried creek bed. It is not much, but it is mine." A person's home is their castle, no matter the size. "You talk like an educated man. That surprises me." Harrison smiled slightly. "Because I look like a wild animal. Because most mountain men I have encountered can barely string 3 words together." There was the faintest hint of humor in her voice. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Missouri. She made sure I could read and write before I was 6 years old. Said education was the one thing nobody could take from you." The memory brought a bittersweet ache. His mother had been dead 10 years now, taken by fever. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. They continued walking, leaving behind the main commercial district. The houses became more scattered, the properties less maintained. This was where the poorest residents of Goldfield lived, those who existed on the margins of the town's prosperity. "May I ask you something?" Faye said. "Go ahead." "Why did you help me? You do not know me, and defending someone like me will not make you popular in this town." Harrison was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I spent 5 years living with a Shoshone tribe up in the Ruby Mountains. They took me in when I was injured and alone, fed me, taught me how to truly survive in the wilderness. The man who refused you service would have called them savages, but they showed me more kindness and humanity than I ever found in so-called civilized society. So when I see someone treated poorly because of their heritage, I cannot stand by and let it happen." Faye stopped walking and turned to look at him fully. Her eyes searched his face, and Harrison felt something stir in his chest, something he had not felt in years. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a strength in her, a resilience that called to something deep within him. "Thank you," she said softly. "Truly. Most people in this town look through me like I am invisible, or they look at me with contempt. You are the first person in months who has treated me like I am human. Then this town is full of fools." A genuine smile crossed her face, transforming her features and making Harrison's heart skip a beat. Lord, but she was lovely when she smiled. They resumed walking, and soon Faye pointed to a small cabin set back from the road. It was weathered but sturdy, with a tiny garden plot beside it where a few determined vegetables struggled against the desert heat. "This is home," she said, pulling a key from her pocket. Harrison followed her to the door and waited while she unlocked it. The interior was sparse but clean, with a small iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves that held a few precious belongings. Everything was neat and organized, and the floor had been swept recently. "You can set the supplies on the table," Faye said, and Harrison did so carefully. He looked around the small space and felt a wave of respect for this woman. She was clearly making do with very little, but she had created a home here through sheer determination. "I meant what I said about paying you back," Faye said, opening her purse. "I have some money now, and I can give you the rest as I earn it. Keep your money. You earned it through hard work, and you need it. I will not be in debt to you." Harrison could see the fierce independence in her eyes and knew better than to argue. "How about this? You can repay me by letting me call on you tomorrow. Maybe share a meal." Faye looked startled. "You want to court me? I want to get to know you better." "If that leads to courting, well, I would not be opposed to that. You do not even know me. I could be a terrible person. Somehow I doubt that, and besides, I would like to find out for myself." He moved toward the door, then turned back. "I will be staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street for the next few weeks. If you need anything at all, you come find me. Promise me that." Faye nodded slowly. "I promise. And Harrison, thank you again, not just for the supplies, but for the kindness." I had almost forgotten what that felt like. As Harrison walked back toward the center of town, he found his thoughts circling back to Faye again and again. There was something about her that had reached past all his defenses, touched something in him that he thought had died years ago. He had been alone for so long, living like a hermit in the mountains, that he had forgotten what it felt like to want companionship, to crave connection with another person. That night, lying in his narrow bed at the boarding house, Harrison stared at the ceiling and wondered if he was being a fool. He would be heading back to the mountains eventually. That was his life now, the only life he knew how to live. What kind of future could he offer a woman like Faye? She deserved better than a man who spent most of his time in the wilderness, living rough and dangerous. But even as these thoughts troubled him, he could not shake the image of her face, the sound of her voice, the way she had stood up to Morton despite knowing she would lose. That took courage, real courage, and Harrison found himself drawn to her strength as much as her beauty. The next morning, Harrison woke early and made his way to the barber for a proper shave and haircut. He kept his hair long, but he had it trimmed and cleaned. He bought new clothes too, trading his buckskins for a decent pair of trousers, a clean shirt, and a vest. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. He looked almost civilized. He bought flowers from a street vendor, a small bouquet of wildflowers that had been brought down from the mountains. Then, feeling more nervous than he had in years, he made his way to Faye's cabin. She answered his knock wearing a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. When she saw the flowers, her eyes widened with surprise and pleasure. "These are for you," Harrison said, suddenly feeling awkward with the bouquet in his large hands. "They are beautiful. Please come in." She took the flowers and found a cup to use as a vase, filling it with water from a pitcher. I was not sure you would really come. I said I would. Men say a lot of things. They do not always follow through. She arranged the flowers carefully, her fingers gentle on the delicate stems. I made stew if you are hungry. It is not fancy, but it is filling. Stew sounds perfect. They sat at her small table and Faye ladled out generous portions. The stew was simple, made with vegetables from her garden and a small amount of salt pork, but it was seasoned well and tasted of care. "This is good," Harrison said honestly. "Real good. Thank you. My mother taught me to cook." She said it was important to make even simple food taste like love. "Your mother sounds like she was a special person." Faye's expression grew sad. "She was. She died when I was 15. My father passed 2 years later. That was when I came to Goldfield, hoping to make a new start." "Has it been difficult?" "More than I expected. My mother was Paiute, my father was white. That makes me unwelcome in both worlds. The native communities see me as too white, and the white communities see me as too native. I exist in the spaces between, never quite belonging anywhere." She looked down at her bowl. "I should not be telling you all this. You will think I am feeling sorry for myself. I think you are being honest. There is a difference." Harrison reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "For what it is worth, I know something about not fitting in. I have never been comfortable in towns, around people. The wilderness makes sense to me in a way that civilization never has. Maybe we are both caught between worlds." Faye turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. Her hand was small in his grip, but her touch sent warmth spreading through his chest. They sat like that for a long moment, connected across the table, and Harrison felt something shift inside him, like a key turning in a lock he had not known existed. "Tell me about the mountains," Faye said softly. "What is it like up there?" So Harrison told her. He described the Ruby Mountains in detail, painting pictures with his words of towering peaks and alpine meadows, of crystal-clear streams and forests so thick with pine that the air itself seemed green. He told her about the silence, the kind of profound quiet that let you hear your own heartbeat, and the stars at night that looked close enough to touch. "It sounds beautiful," Faye said, her eyes distant with imagining. "I have never been far from the desert. I cannot even picture what a real forest looks like. Maybe I could take you there someday, show you. Maybe." But there was longing in her voice, a yearning for something beyond the harsh confines of her daily life. They talked for hours, losing track of time as they shared stories and dreams. Harrison learned that Faye had taught herself to read using her mother's old Bible and whatever newspapers she could find. She loved poetry and had memorized dozens of poems. In turn, he told her about his childhood in Missouri, about running away at 16 to escape his father's anger, about wandering west and finding himself in the process. When the light outside began to fade, Harrison reluctantly stood to leave. "I should go, but may I see you again tomorrow?" "I would like that. But Harrison, I need to tell you something." Faye stood as well, wrapping her arms around herself. "People in this town, they will not look kindly on you spending time with me. You could face trouble, lose business opportunities, maybe worse. Let them think what they want. I stopped caring about other people's opinions a long time ago. I just do not want you to be hurt because of me." Harrison stepped closer and gently cupped her face in his large hands. "Faye Garrett, you listen to me. I am a grown man and I make my own choices. I choose to spend time with you because you are smart and strong and beautiful, and because talking to you makes me feel more alive than I have in years. What anyone else thinks about that does not matter a damn to me." Tears gathered in Faye's eyes, but she was smiling. "You barely know me." "Then let me get to know you better. Give me that chance." "All right," she whispered. "Yes." Harrison leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Faye rose on her toes to meet him, and when their lips touched, Harrison felt the world fall away. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Tomorrow," Harrison said. "Tomorrow," Faye agreed. Over the following weeks, Harrison and Faye became inseparable. He called on her every day, sometimes bringing small gifts, wild game he had hunted, or supplies he knew she needed. They took walks together in the early morning before the desert heat became unbearable, and they spent long evenings talking by lamplight in her small cabin. Harrison discovered that Faye had a quick wit and a sharp mind. She had opinions on everything from politics to philosophy, and she was not afraid to argue with him when they disagreed. He loved that about her, the way she challenged him and made him think. For her part, Faye found herself falling deeply in love with this gentle giant of a man. Despite his rough exterior and dangerous appearance, Harrison was unfailingly kind and considerate. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and he treated her thoughts and feelings as valuable. He made her feel safe in a way she never had before, as if his mere presence could shield her from all the harshness of the world. But their happiness did not go unnoticed, and not everyone in Goldfield was pleased to see a white mountain man courting a half-native woman. One evening, as Harrison was walking Faye home from the small church social she had convinced him to attend, they were confronted by three men. Harrison recognized one of them as Morton's son, a troublemaker named Carl who spent most of his time drinking and gambling. "Well, well," Carl said, stepping into their path. His friends flanked him, all three reeking of whiskey. "If it is not the squaw and her pet bear." Harrison felt Faye tense beside him. He gently moved her behind him, putting his body between her and the men. "Step aside. We do not want any trouble. But maybe we do. Maybe we are tired of seeing you parade around town with this half-breed like she is some kind of decent woman." "Watch your mouth," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Or what? You will hurt me." Carl laughed, though his eyes were nervous. "There are three of us and only one of you. Then the odds are almost fair." Harrison took a step forward, and all three men instinctively backed up. "Now I am going to walk this lady home, and you are going to get out of our way. Or we can do this the hard way, and I promise you that is a choice you will regret." One of Carl's friends grabbed his arm. "Come on, Carl. He is not worth it. Let's go back to the saloon." Carl hesitated, clearly wanting to save face but also smart enough to recognize genuine danger when he saw it. Finally, he spat on the ground and turned away. "This is not over." "Yes, it is," Harrison called after them. "And if you or anyone else bothers Miss Garrett again, you will answer to me." When the men had disappeared, Faye let out a shaky breath. "You should not have provoked them. Carl Morton is mean when he is drunk. He is a coward and a bully. Backing down would only have encouraged him." Harrison turned and took both her hands in his. "Faye, I need you to understand something. I am not going anywhere. Whatever threats come our way, we will face them together. I am not afraid of small-minded men like Carl Morton." "I am afraid," Faye admitted. "Not for myself, but for you. You could get hurt because of me. And I would gladly take that risk. You are worth it." They stood together in the growing darkness, and Harrison pulled Faye into his arms, holding her close. He could feel her heart beating against his chest, quick and frightened, and he wished he could absorb all her fear and carry it himself. "Come with me," Harrison said suddenly. "Where?" "To the mountains. My cabin is up there, remote and safe. We could leave this town behind, all the hatred and prejudice. We could build a life together away from all this." Faye pulled back to look at his face. "You are serious. Dead serious." "I have been alone up there for 5 years, and I was content with that loneliness until I met you. Now I cannot imagine going back without you. Marry me, Faye, be my wife. Harrison, we have only known each other for 3 weeks. I know. And maybe that makes me a fool, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the world. I love how you make me want to be a better man. Marry me. Faye's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. God help me, I do. But marriage is forever. Are you sure this is what you want? A life with me means accepting that our children will face the same prejudice I have faced. It means isolation and hardship. All I know is that a life without you would be empty. The rest we can figure out together. He knelt down on one knee, right there in the dusty street, and looked up at her. Faye Garrett, will you marry me? Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, yes, I will marry you. Harrison stood and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed with joy. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, not caring who might see. They were married a week later by the circuit preacher who came through Goldfield. The ceremony was small and simple, with only a handful of witnesses, but to Harrison and Faye, it was perfect. Faye wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Harrison wore his best clothes. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison felt his throat tighten with emotion. That night, in Faye's small cabin that was now theirs together, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Harrison was careful with Faye, mindful of his greater size and strength, and she responded to him with a trust and openness that humbled him. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Harrison felt a contentment he had never known before. I want to give you everything, he whispered against her hair. I want to give you a real home, security, happiness. You already have, Faye said, tracing patterns on his broad chest. You have given me love and acceptance. That is more than I ever hoped for. Then I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. They spent 2 more weeks in Goldfield, during which time Harrison sold his remaining pelts and used the money to buy supplies for their journey to the mountains. He purchased a sturdy horse for Faye, blankets, food stores, ammunition, and tools. They would need to be self-sufficient in the wilderness, and Harrison was determined to be prepared. On the morning they were set to leave, Silas Morton appeared at their cabin. Harrison answered the door, immediately on guard, but the shopkeeper held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. I am not here to cause trouble, Morton said. I came to apologize. Harrison raised an eyebrow but said nothing. What I did, refusing service to your wife, it was wrong. I let my prejudices control me, and I am ashamed of that. Morton looked past Harrison to where Faye stood in the cabin. Miss Garrett, I mean Mrs. Nash, I am sorry for how I treated you. You deserved better. Faye came to stand beside Harrison. Why the change of heart, my daughter? She is about your age. She heard about what I did, and she told me she was ashamed to be my child. Made me take a hard look at myself, and I did not like what I saw. Morton pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. This is a wedding gift, some dried fruits and sweets for your journey. It is not much, but I hope you will accept it. Faye took the package, her expression softening. Thank you, Mr. Morton. I accept your apology. After Morton left, Harrison pulled Faye close. You have a generous heart. He was trying to make amends. That takes courage. Besides, I do not want to leave here carrying anger and resentment. I want to start our new life with a clean slate. They departed Goldfield at dawn, riding north toward the Ruby Mountains. The journey took them 6 days, through desert and scrubland, gradually climbing into higher elevations where the air grew cooler and the landscape more forgiving. Harrison watched Faye's face as they entered the first real forest, saw her wonder and delight at the towering pines and the sound of running water. It is even more beautiful than you described, she said. looking around with wide eyes. "Wait until you see the cabin." Harrison's cabin was located in a high valley, surrounded by peaks and accessible only by a narrow trail. It was built of solid logs and stone, with a fireplace, real glass windows that Harrison had packed in years ago, and a loft for sleeping. Behind it was a small barn for the horses and a smokehouse for preserving meat. "This is ours?" Faye asked, dismounting and walking toward the cabin with something like reverence. "This is home." Over the following months, they settled into their new life. Harrison taught Faye everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness. She learned to fish and hunt, to read animal tracks and predict the weather. She proved to be a quick study and a natural shot with a rifle. Together, they worked to improve the cabin, adding shelves and a better stove, expanding the garden plot. Life was hard work, but it was also deeply satisfying. They woke with the sun and fell asleep exhausted each night, wrapped in each other's arms. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They made love by firelight and laughed together over simple pleasures. When the first snow fell, Faye stood outside the cabin with her face turned up to the sky, catching flakes on her tongue like a child. Harrison watched her with his heart full, thinking that he had never seen anything more beautiful. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Faye said, coming to stand beside him. "Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for coming with me, for choosing this life, choosing me." That winter, snowed in and isolated, was one of the happiest times of Harrison's life. They had stockpiled plenty of food and firewood, and there was nothing to do but enjoy each other's company. Faye read to him from the books they had brought, her voice filling the cabin with stories and poems. Harrison carved her small gifts from wood: a comb, a box for her treasures, a set of spoons. When spring came, it brought with it a surprise. Faye began feeling ill in the mornings, and she quickly realized what it meant. "I am with child," she told Harrison one evening, her hand resting on her still, flat belly. Harrison felt joy surge through him so powerfully it almost brought him to his knees. "Truly, truly, we are going to have a baby." He gathered her into his arms, being careful not to hold her too tightly, and buried his face in her hair. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be a wonderful father, I know it." The pregnancy was not easy. Faye suffered from sickness and exhaustion, and there were moments when Harrison worried desperately about her health. But she was strong and determined, and she refused to let the difficulties dampen her joy. As her belly grew round with their child, Harrison found himself overwhelmed with protective instincts. He insisted on doing all the heavy work, barely let Faye lift anything heavier than a cup. She tolerated his hovering with patient amusement. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she would tell him with a smile. "I know, but I cannot help it. You and this baby are my whole world." In late autumn, when the aspens had turned gold and the air had a sharp bite, Faye went into labor. Harrison had prepared as best he could, gathering clean cloths and water, but he felt utterly helpless as Faye's contractions intensified. "You can do this," he told her, holding her hand as she labored. "You are the strongest person I know." It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Harrison stayed by Faye's side the entire time, wiping her forehead, supporting her, whispering encouragement. And finally, as the sun was setting, their son was born. Harrison cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped the baby in a soft blanket. The infant's cries filled the cabin, strong and healthy, and Harrison felt tears streaming down his face as he placed the child in Faye's arms. "A son," Faye whispered, exhausted but radiantly happy. "We have a son." The baby had a thick shock of dark hair and Faye's eyes. Harrison touched his tiny hand, marveling at the perfection of his small fingers. "What should we name him?" Harrison asked. "What was your father's name?" "Henry. But he was not a good man. I would rather not name our son after him." "What about your mother?" "Her name was Helen." "Then let's call him Henry anyway, but for his grandmother, not his grandfather. Henry Nash, named in honor of a good, kind woman. I like that. Henry Nash." Harrison leaned down and kissed his wife's forehead. "You did so well. You were so brave." "We made something beautiful together," Faye said, looking down at their son with wonder. "He is perfect." The first year of Henry's life was challenging but joyful. Harrison had never imagined that such a tiny creature could completely transform his existence, but fatherhood changed him in fundamental ways. He had always been protective, but now he understood a fierce, primal need to keep his family safe from all harm. Faye proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, somehow managing to keep the household running while caring for an infant. Harrison helped as much as he could, changing Henry's cloths, walking him when he fussed, singing him rough lullabies in his deep voice. When Henry was 2 years old, Faye became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and she delivered a healthy daughter in the spring. They named her Hope because that was what she represented to them, hope for the future. "Now we have one of each," Faye said, cradling Hope while Henry slept nearby. "Our family feels complete." Harrison looked at his wife and children, at this life they had built together in the wilderness, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. "I never knew I could have this. Never thought I deserved it." "You deserve all the happiness in the world. You are a good man, Harrison Nash." The years passed, and their children grew. Henry became a sturdy, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to trap and hunt and survive in the wilderness. Hope was quieter, more thoughtful, with her mother's love of learning and her father's gentle strength. When the children were older, Harrison would sometimes take the family down to Goldfield for supplies. The town had changed over the years, growing larger and more prosperous. And attitudes had shifted too, slowly but noticeably. Harrison and Faye were greeted with courtesy now, their children accepted without the prejudice Faye had once faced. Silas Morton, now an old man, always made a point of giving the children peppermint sticks when they came into his store. "Fine youngsters you have got," he would say to Harrison and Faye. "You should be proud." "We are," Harrison always replied, his arm around Faye's shoulders. One evening, when Harrison was 50 and Faye 48, they sat together on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were grown now, Henry married with a child of his own, Hope studying to become a teacher in the town that had grown up near the base of the mountain. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked. "Leaving civilization, living this hard life with me?" Faye leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her. "Not for a single moment. This life with you has been more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me love and respect and a family. You gave me freedom to be myself. How could I regret any of that? I love you, Faye Nash. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing up to that shopkeeper, refusing to be diminished. And I love you. You saved me that day in more ways than one. You showed me that I was worthy of kindness, of love. You gave me a home, not just this cabin, but a home in your heart." They sat together as the light faded, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from their love. Harrison thought back to that day in Goldfield, 27 years ago, when he had heard a woman being refused service and made the choice to help her. It was the best decision he had ever made. "Tell me again about the day we met," Faye said, as she often did. So Harrison told the story once more about the proud, beautiful woman who refused to be broken by prejudice, and the mountain man who fell in love with her strength. He told it the way he always did, with honesty and emotion, and when he finished, Faye kissed him softly. "That is my favorite story," she said. "Mine too. Because it is the story of how I found my home, my heart, my everything." They grew old together in their mountain cabin, surrounded by the children and grandchildren who came to visit. Harrison's hair turned silver and his hands grew gnarled with age, but he remained strong and protective until the end. Faye's face gained lines and her hair turned white, but to Harrison, she was always the beautiful young woman he had first seen in that dusty general store. When Harrison was 68, he died peacefully in his sleep, with Faye holding his hand. She grieved him deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together. She lived another 5 years, often sitting on the porch and talking to Harrison as if he were still there beside her. When Faye passed, she was buried next to Harrison in a small plot overlooking the valley they had loved. Their children planted wildflowers around the graves, the same kind of wildflowers Harrison had brought Faye on their first date. Years later, their great-grandchildren would ask to hear the story of how Harrison and Faye met. And the tale would be told again, of a mountain man who saw injustice and chose to act, who bought what a woman needed and walked her home, and in doing so, found the love of his life. It was a story of courage and kindness, of love that transcended prejudice and hardship. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important choice we make is to treat another person with dignity and respect, because we never know where that simple act of decency might lead. In the end, Harrison and Faye's legacy was not measured in wealth or status, but in the family they created and the love they shared. They had faced a world that told them they did not belong together, and they had built their own world instead. One founded on mutual respect, deep love, and unwavering commitment. Their story lived on in the memories of their descendants, in the cabin that still stood in the high valley, in the lessons they had taught about standing up for what is right and choosing love over fear. It was a simple story, really, but the best stories often are. A man saw a woman in need and chose to help her. And from that single act of kindness, a lifetime of love was born. The mountains stood eternal, keeping watch over the place where Harrison and Faye had made their home, where they had raised their children, where they had loved each other completely until death parted them. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right through the pines, you could almost hear the echo of laughter, the sound of two souls who had found their perfect match against all odds, and lived happily ever after in the wild and beautiful wilderness they called home.